Ever like that?
Well, my name is Jerry Schrock, and I will be 85 in 3 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
And
Coming up on it.
coming up on it. Yep.
Mm-hmm. Alrighty, so we'll start off after that. We'll go with, when I explain where you were born. You said it wasn't a hospital, so you can say where you were born at, the town, and everything like that.
Start now?
Yeah, go
All
ahead.
right. I was born in Gibson City, Illinois, in my grandparents' home. Nobody was born in a hospital in those days. And delivered by a midwife. The doctor was late arriving, but he finally made it. And that's the town I grew up in, and didn't leave home till I was 18.
So, who were you born to?
Sam and Merle Schrock. My mother was a Troyer, and it was the Troyer home that I was born in. My grandma and grandpa Troyer.
Mm-hmm. Now, what nationality was that? Troy, or what was that?
German.
German
Just
as well?
like Schrock, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Although I learned later, and they did too, that apparently there was a little Swiss in with the German.
Oh, really?
With Troyer.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And then grandma's Swedish, correct?
Grandma was a Wetterman,
Okay.
and she was Swedish.
Mm.
Right. And on my dad's side, they were all German. My dad, of course, came from a long line of Schrocks.
Mm-hmm.
And my grandma was I can't even think of her maiden name, but she was raised by people by the name of Wolf. Havenstein was her born name.
Mm-hmm.
But something happened to her parents while she was just a baby, and so she went as an orphan to live with the Wolf family.
Okay.
I can't say the wolves in that case, but
She went to live with the wolves.
went to live with the wolves, you know.
And do you know the earliest ancestor that was an immigrant, or was pretty much everybody you knew already in America?
My grandma Schroyer, my grandma Schrock was an immigrant, but before my dad was even born, very shortly after she and my grandpa Schrock were married, she came over. They all, back another generation, they all came from different parts of, well, mainly Alsace-Lorraine, but in Germany.
Mm-hmm.
And my grandma was born and raised in Berlin, the one that was an orphan.
Okay.
And she came over, I think, at the age of 18, met my grandfather, and then their 7 children was born. One of them died at like 6 or 7 years old.
Yeah.
But the other 6 lived a long time.
Oh, yeah.
My dad was the first to die at 70 years old.
First of the 6 that made it.
The rest of them all got to their 80s and 90s.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you and Grandma both had long,
Yeah.
long lives on either side.
Yeah, we did. We did.
Mm-hmm. So what did your parents do for work?
My mom was just a housewife.
Okay.
And I shouldn't say just a housewife, but I mean...
Can't say that these days.
Yeah, no, that's right. But I mean, nothing beyond that. And my dad worked the first 8 years of he and my mom's married life at the Caterpillar in Peoria on the ball bearing line. Used to install ball bearings in tractors. And he was a gifted woodworker and carpenter, and so he decided to move back to Gibson City, and he spent the rest of his life being a carpenter. and a cabinet maker. Back in interesting days when there was no such thing as a pre-hung door or ready-made cabinets or anything, they would deliver sheets of plywood,
everything custom,
or board feet of lumber, and he would make the door frames and then make the door out of a plywood sheet, and he did beautiful work.
Yeah. Yeah. So what was your family like growing up? What was your relationship with your parents? Or
it was fabulous. I was an only child, so it's pretty hard not to have a fabulous relationship. You're spoiled rotten. You know?
Yeah.
But it was great. I grew up knowing the Lord all my life, and that was good. And we lived a very quiet. Nobody could afford to do anything. We lived a very quiet life. Interestingly, just to show you how tight we lived, Mom had a jelly jar in the cupboard, and every time Dad would come home and have an extra nickel or a dime in his change purse, he would put it in that jelly jar.
Yeah.
And when we got up to, I suppose it was $1 or it was under $2, then we'd all walk to town, get a quart of strawberry pop, and what they called a brick of ice cream, which was the size of a brick. And we all three go home and have strawberry sundaes. And that would happen maybe about once every month or 6 weeks.
Yeah.
And boy, that was a treat. That was cool.
You lived for that.
Yeah, I was always ready for that.
Yeah.
Yeah. But you say that today and it sounds ridiculous, but everybody lived that way then.
Yeah.
I mean, everybody was right down to the skin when it came to budget.
Yeah. The necessities are definitely different than, or viewed differently than they are now.
I don't know how families with 5 or 6 kids ever made it. But
now, was that very common, especially in a small town like you were in, or
to have just one child, or to have
multiple?
Have 5 or 6. Yeah.
Because I know, like, Grandma, she had 9 siblings.
Yeah.
Now they were out on a farm, so that was a little different.
My wife.
Yes, you're right.
Yeah.
Yes, sorry.
Yeah, she was second oldest of 10.
Yeah.
But they lived on a 160-acre farm. They raised pigs. They milked cows. And then Grandma Dixon had a huge garden, and they lived off of the land.
Yeah.
They didn't. The only spare money they had for their strawberry pop and brick of ice cream, whatever, came from, they used to separate the milk after they milked, and Grandma would take the cream to town and sell it, and she always had an excess of eggs. Yeah. And she would take eggs to town.
They probably had a lot longer walk to town, huh?
Oh, well, yeah, that wasn't a walk. Yeah, that was a ride. But, when you look at that today and you think that had to be, she probably sold those eggs for $2 every week and the cream for maybe that.
Yeah.
And when you get 10 kids, that's not a lot of spare cash.
Nope, not at all.
No. So,
yeah,
but you know what? I cherish that history and that background. I wouldn't have had it any other way. I know you kids kid me about being frugal, but I tell you, nothing will make you any more frugal than the practice thereof.
Oh, yeah.
When you have to be frugal.
Yeah,
and so...
Yeah, now were you kind of born around the end era of the Depression, people coming out of that?
I was. My dad lost a car dealership in the Depression.
Oh, really?
He sold something called Durant's, and Stars. They were
Yeah.
pretty popular cars in those days. And he and my Uncle Joe, his brother, my dad's brother, owned Schrock Brothers Garage.
Oh, really?
And they folded because nobody could afford to buy a car.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he went back to carpentering again.
Yeah. Yeah, now when did he play baseball?
That would have been, he didn't get married until he was 37.
Okay.
And so that was all before he was ever married or before I knew him.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, but yeah, he played semi-pro ball.
Yeah. What was the team that he played for?
I don't know. I want to say they were out of St. Louis,
Okay.
but I'm not sure. But my dad was a pitcher.
Yeah.
He had the longest legs anybody ever saw, so they called him Legs Schrock. But he had a heck of a wind-up.
Yeah.
Yeah. He still played ball with me after I came along, but you got to remember, the time I came along and was of baseball vintage, he was 50 years old.
Yeah.
So he didn't have the stretch he used to have.
Definitely. Yeah, so how did that change as you got older? Once you became of age of like that, saying your dad was mid-50s by the time you were doing sports like that, how did that change your family dynamic or anything?
Well, I left home when I graduated from high school because there was nothing to do in my little hometown, and my parents couldn't afford to send me to college.
Yeah.
And so I moved to Chicago and went to work. And my dad would have been like 52 or 3 or 4. He was born in 1895, so you can kind of figure it for yourself. I was born in 1934, so it had to be 1945 or 46 before I had any interest in playing much ball.
Yeah.
And then my dad got lung cancer and died in 66 at the age of 70. So there wasn't a whole, I mean, I was very close to my dad, but there wasn't much of a sports relationship. And I wasn't that great at sports anyway. I thought I was, but I really wasn't. I wasn't really that bad, to be honest with you. But we had, when I was on the ball team in high school, we had 3 guys that wound up on a White Sox farm team.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, and would have gone farther, except they got themselves into some immoral situation and wrecked their lives. But I didn't really have much of a chance to play in high school, but I used to practice.
Yeah.
Yeah. But anyway, I lost Dad early, and our greatest relationship was that my dad loved to hunt and fish. So he and I were hunting or fishing somewhere all the time. He taught me how to shoot and the whole 9 yards.
Yeah, and now you said you used to, because you guys didn't have refrigeration, you guys used to go out and hunt to get fresh meat.
Yeah, we did. That's the only way we had fresh meat was we would butcher in the wintertime, but you had to eat it up in a hurry. We would split a hog or sometimes a calf with 3 other members of the family because you only had a couple weeks to, and you could only keep it on ice for so long. And so that was that. And then in the summertime, also in the winter, we hunted a lot, and we probably ate more rabbit and pheasant than anything else. And then in the summertime, we fished. And I know this sounds horrible, but the main fish that people ate then was because about all there was either carp or catfish.
Oh, yeah.
And as you know, they're both bottom feeders. And so that's not cool today. But in those days, the only place we fished was in deep gravel pits, be 25, 30, 35 foot deep. and that meat was just as clean and good flavored as anything you'd ever want to taste. So
Yeah.
so it wasn't as though we were eating out of the garbage can or anything.
Exactly.
We ate well because my mother was a fabulous cook. Yeah.
Yeah. So what, do you have any outstanding memory of your dad that is kind of the first thing you think of from when you were a kid, or even just in general?
Just in general, our great hunting trips.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember one time that one of the aunts and uncles contacted us. You didn't call in those days because nobody had a telephone. But they'd send postcards.
Yeah.
My mom got a postcard. We're all meeting at Uncle Henry and Aunt Orpha's house Sunday for dinner after church. Can you guys bring the meat? Really?
Yeah.
So my dad and I went out Saturday, blistering weather, just died out there in that cold wind. And we showed up with the meat. We, of course, cleaned them for you. But we showed up with 19 rabbits and 4 pheasants, and that
Really?
fed everybody.
For how many people?
I don't remember, probably 15.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
That's funny.
But, you know, the sad thing of it is today, you could go out in my hometown area of Gibson City, and you could walk all day long and never see a pheasant, and you might see one rabbit running a long ways away
Yeah.
until the coyotes got him. He wouldn't be there by tomorrow.
Yeah.
But so that's it. But yeah, we used to kind of have contests between my dad and I, as to who would get the most rabbits.
Throughout the year, or just on each trip, do you think?
No, on each, each trip. And then at that time, when I think of the things that were allowed then that aren't allowed now, you could shoot game out of your car.
Yeah.
So we would drive, there were hedgerows everywhere, big hedges. And we'd drive along real slow, and the rabbits would live in the hedges or sit there all day. We'd pull up, and I got to the point where I could shoot right through the eyes of the rabbit from one side to the other so that nothing got torn up in the meat. It was clean. My dad used to love that. And he got to the point where he expected me to make a headshot on a rabbit.
Yeah, you said he would stop if you shot, right? Because he knew you were hitting it.
Yeah.
That was with the 410?
No, that was with the 22 short.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
When did you get that 410?
Oh, Dad had that from way before I was. Mm-hmm. But the thing we used to do with that 410 was the crows, which were just obnoxious in those days because they were so thick. And if you ever stopped, they were gone. They'd fly away. But, and in those days, hawks were a menace. So we used to try to keep the hawk population down too, because they'd eat all the chickens. But if you kept driving, kind of slow, but kept driving, they wouldn't fly off of the cross arm of a telephone pole. And Dad would drive along, and I'd just reach out and and peel them off of the.
Yeah.
Yeah, we used to have a big time doing that.
Oh, I'm sure.
Yeah. Yeah. So.
Yeah.
Those were the good old days.
Now, switching gears a little bit too, what about your grandparents? How long were they around in your life?
Well, I never knew my Grandma Schrock. She was dead before I was born. Grandpa Schrock was very, very old by the time I came along, and I don't know what he had, whether it was just old age or what, but he stayed with an aunt and uncle, and all he did was just sit in a chair. And if you talked to him, he'd talk to you a little bit, but he didn't converse much, so I really hardly knew him. On my mom's side, my grandma and grandpa Troyer were retired. Grandpa had suffered poor health after the flu. He almost died in the big flu epidemic of 1917.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and it ruined him. Ruined his nerves and his body and everything. So he didn't really do much. He would paint people's houses on the side, but take a long time to do it.
Okay.
Just for a little spending money. But they lived in Gibson City, and I used to visit them a lot and had a great relationship with them, but there just wasn't anything to ever, I didn't have a relationship with them like we have, like I do with my grandchildren today. But it was a good life. It was a poor life,
Yeah.
but it was a good life. You know, we were really, really poor. I didn't even know it.
Yeah.
I got to be almost an adult before I had any idea we were poor.
Yeah. Now, was that something that your parents or families just didn't talk about at the time?
That's right.
Yeah.
They didn't complain about anything.
Yeah.
And in our house, where there was only three of us, Mom and Dad and me, Mom never put any pressure on Dad for like new clothes or anything. I got hand-me-downs from my cousins, and so there wasn't much to need money for.
Yeah.
And then the war came along, and you couldn't buy gas because it was all rationed.
Yeah.
And I was 10 years old when that started. No, I was 7 years old when that started.
Okay.
So we could never go anywhere in the car because you couldn't buy gas.
Yeah.
And so that was, they would give my dad enough gas coupons that he could buy that amount of gas for the week to drive back and forth. It was 12 miles each way to work.
Okay.
And if you were out driving and the police or whoever it was would decide to pull you over, and they'd stick a hose down your gas tank and suck some gas out, and that gas that you got for work had like a pinkish color to it. And boy, that better not be pinkish gas that come out of your gas tank if you're out taking a Sunday afternoon stroll.
Yeah, exactly.
So nobody took that chance, because what you would do would be lose your coupons, and then my dad would have had no way to work.
Be out of work at that point, yeah.
He would have been out of work, and because he had no other way of getting there.
Yeah.
So interesting days.
Yeah, definitely. Did
Yeah.
anybody from your close family go to the war at all, or were they
No,
pretty much at home?
no, yeah, they 2 or 3 of them did. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, let's see. I might, oh, perfect. All right. So you've talked a little bit about the town you grew up in. Do you
Yeah.
have any more that you want to talk about at all? For
Yeah,
Gibson?
you know, when I was a kid, starting, I guess, when I was maybe 12, I started hanging around the depot. I have no idea why, but I was intrigued by trains. And then when I would go into the depot and talk with the guys, and they were all so nice to me. There were 3 guys that worked in there. And I get interested in telegraphy. And they taught me the Morse code.
Yeah.
Got to the point where they would let me do their telegraphy for them.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And it was funny. I've looked back later. I would even telegraph some of the stuff that went to one of the big shots of the railroad in Muncie, Indiana. And I thought, if these guys realized some punk kid 12 years old was sending those messages, somebody would have gotten fired, I'm sure.
Yeah. Yeah, the nice part too is there's no voice behind it, so you can't tell who it is.
No, it's a dot and a dash. That's it.
That's perfect.
Yeah. Yeah.
What else would you do for fun around Gibson?
Played a lot of sandlot ball.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of sandlot ball. And I worked. I had my first job when I was 10 years old, really.
Yeah.
I bought every stitch of my clothes from the time I was 14 on.
Yeah, really.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
What was that first job at 10?
Working for a veterinarian
Okay.
who had saved my little dog's life.
Yeah.
And so I went to him and I said, I just feel like I owe you immensely because you saved Pepper's life. And he laughed. He said, well, that's the business I'm in. You don't owe me anything for that. Other than, of course, we paid the vet bill. And now I guess you get to thinking about that. And a couple of days later, he called me and he said, why don't you come by and we'll see what we can find for you to do in the office. Well, I never was very shy. I could handle telephone calls and whatever. And so people would call in and they would need to have their pigs vaccinated, or they had a cow that was sick or something, and I could make a reservation for Doc, knowing his, and then he taught me how to sterilize the equipment, and so I did that. You had to boil it all, and went back in those days. Mm-hmm. And I got to the point, after working for him for a couple of years, I would assist him in surgery.
Really?
And that was cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Was that mostly home visits, or would they bring a lot of the animals to you?
Oh, they would all, we never, the only time you did home delivery would be like if you cut a fistula on a horse, or if a cow had Bang's disease or something and she needed to be treated, you'd do that right in the barn. But like dogs and cats, they all had to come into the office. Yeah.
What was your next job, or how long did you work that one that you were at?
I had so many things going on at the same time. I don't really remember. In the meantime, with my spare time in between, I hung around the depot a lot and did whatever I could do there with the telegraphy and stuff. And I got to the point where I was as good a telegrapher as the two of the three guys that did the telegraphy there.
Yeah.
And so they'd let me do it. And I think I told you the story about how close I came to changing my life very innocently. There was an old man in town that used to bring animals in a cage, one at a time, about once a week. And it would sit on the rack outside the depot until a passenger train came along, and they get loaded on the passenger train and head east. And so I asked one day, where's all the dogs going? And the guys looked at one another. They didn't really want to tell me. And they said, well, who gathers all the lost dogs and swipes half of them in town? Yeah. Well, he sells them to a lab over in Indiana, and they do vivisection on them, which was brutal stuff, just brutal stuff. So I looked into a little bit more about what vivisection was. And
you jump online and do that?
Yeah, right. Yeah. No, but my dad helped me do that. And so it really upset me. I couldn't even sleep at night over it. So a couple weeks later, there's a dog on the rack out there. And I thought, I'm just going to go over and let that dog out. And then something just told me I better be careful. That might get me in a lot of trouble if somebody saw me do it. And I wasn't worried about the act of doing it. I was just only worried about getting caught, which is typical kid, And last minute I decided not to do it. The train came in, loaded the dog. I bet I cried for 2 hours after that. Boy, I couldn't even look at that guy in town that would do that would send him over there. Well, then when I wound up going to work for the railroad, and I looked into the fact that was Railway Express. And if you stole anything like that out of a Railway Express shipment, boy, that was a federal crime. And it could have just changed my life, even as like a 12 or 13, maybe I was 14, I don't know. But that would have changed my life. And the only reason I even bring that up, it taught me compassion and taught me to have a feeling for young kids that do something dumb like that, but really for compassionate reasons. And I just loved dogs. And it just absolutely broke me up when I found out what was happening with those dogs.
Yeah.
And I could have done that. Somebody would have, somebody said, Schrock, do you know anything about that? And I'd have to say yes. And, but it would have, I'd have probably wound up in reform school, and that would have been a major change in my life, because that's on your record forever,
Yeah.
But at the same time, it made me realize later when I became an adult, especially when I got to working with youth after I moved to Chicago, and it gave me compassion for kids that do things for emotional reasons like that, and not for the sake of stealing or being bad or
definitely.
getting even or anything like that. I just wanted to save that dog.
Mm-hmm.
And I've thought of that so many times.
Yeah. Definitely would have altered the course of your life for sure. You said you would have been unhireable, right? You would have been seen.
Well, I sure would have been for a number of years. Somebody may have come along and said, hey, it's been long enough now, but that puts a record on you, because if you go to reform school, that's like going to prison. And you don't, when you wag your tail, that doesn't come off,
Yeah.
You don't get rid of that.
Yeah. Now, back then, would that have followed you if you moved somewhere else outside of Gibson?
Oh, sure. Well, it would follow you anywhere in the United States if it was a federal crime.
Yeah.
Yeah. But, and you don't want to be running from something like that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But my point was the fact that I would have done it so innocently, just out of compassion for that. Oh, it was a beautiful dog. I still can see that dog right now while I'm telling you.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was a yellow and white, probably a border collie. I always thought of it as a half-grown collie, but I bet it was a border collie. But that's what it looked like.
Yeah. And now you got this little guy, little buddy.
Yep, that's my buddy. Yeah, and I'd probably come just as close to breaking the law to save his life if it was some idiot doing
that. Alrighty, so what was church like growing up?
Well, when I was like 5 or 6, which is when my memory starts of it, we belonged to a little Mennonite church, which was out in the country, a little country church. Had no electric lights, no heating. It had a potbelly stove in the middle of it, and was a church where my great grandfather on my mother's side had donated 4 acres of land, and then he bought the lumber, and all the guys got together and built the church. And this had happened way before my time. And that was where we belonged. And my whole family on both sides were Mennonite, or my dad's ancestry was actually Amish Mennonite, which isn't like the Amish per se, but it's kind of Mennonites that are really the old style, even more strict. And so at one place or another, everybody belonged to their own little country Mennonite church. And that was ours, and I went to that church until I was about 14, when all of a sudden a bunch of people either died or moved away, and we had to close the church.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So, but there's a sad story that goes with that. My grandfather, whose dad it was that donated the land and the lumber, was a member. This is before my time, obviously, way before. And but he belonged to that church. His father was the pastor. And my grandpa fell in love with a lady 2 miles down the road who was the local teacher in the little country school. And she was a very staunch Lutheran. So she was reluctant about leaving the Lutheran church and coming into the Mennonite church. And so my grandpa told everybody that his wife-to-be would be coming there with him to church, but she wasn't going to join the church because her whole family was very embedded in the Lutheran church out there, just a couple miles up the road, and she wanted to stay a member of that church. And the elders of the church, of which her father was one, and the pastor, said, your wife will become a member of this church, or else you'll be asked to leave the church and you'll be excommunicated.
Oh, really? Because
you can't do that. You gotta have... Well, that made my grandpa angry. So he figured he'd call her bluff. Mm-hmm. And they excommunicated him.
Really?
Told him he couldn't come there anymore.
Wow.
Now, he and Grandma were probably 20 at that time. He lived to be 90. He never set foot inside of a church again after that.
Really?
Yeah. That was always a heartbreaker.
Yeah.
For all of us.
But the rest of the family continued to go to that Mennonite church then?
Well, no, the rest of the family was all in a different direction.
Okay.
And I don't know about that immediate time, but by the time I came along, there was none of that part of the family that still lived around there at all. And our family, my dad's relatives, strangely enough, made up the greatest part of the membership.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of sad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that church, do you think that felt pretty legalistic growing up? Was it kind of hard to live up to some of those standards?
Oh,
or did
yeah.
you feel pretty involved in...
Yeah, and yet, I mean, those people lived their lives just like everybody else, you know.
Yeah.
They certainly were not perfect.
Yeah, exactly.
In any way, shape, or form.
Alrighty, so we'll start off with this question, then we'll move on from that. So who did you look up to the most growing up as a kid?
Well, I guess I'd have to say my father. Mm-hmm. Yeah, we were just, you know, I said this about my father one time, and somebody said to me, that's not very complimentary. And I never did figure out what they meant by that. But I said, the thing that made my dad so great in my mind and in my life is that he knew how and when to be my best friend. He knew when and how to be my dad. And he knew when and how to be my father. Mm-hmm. And he did a really good job of dividing those up. And I hope you understand what I mean by that.
Definitely.
To me, that is really representative of a close relationship and of looking up. Because he had no problem enforcing the rules, even making the rules. He didn't ever take a back seat to that. But that was not his favorite role as father.
Yeah.
He just enjoyed being my dad. And when we were out hunting and fishing and laughing and camping out and building a campfire and whatever, we'd find more stuff to laugh about than you could ever imagine.
Yeah.
And that's when he was my best friend.
That's fun. Yeah, so how did that change as you got older, and how did you take it after you lost him, since that was probably one of your biggest role models and one of your best friends, you said, as well?
Yeah. Well, as I say, I moved away when I was 18.
Yep.
So there wasn't a real long period of that. And then when I moved to Chicago, why, of course, there was some separation there in the fact I didn't see him nearly as often.
Yeah.
But for the first couple of years, I tried to get home every weekend.
Yeah.
And we would still do stuff together. And largely either hunting or fishing. And then after I lost him, I just was lost for a while. It was such a major loss to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And now, was that before or after you met Grandma? When you lost?
Oh, it was after.
It was after.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, he lived long enough to see Greg.
Oh, did he?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. And your mother.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
She was just a babe in arms, but
yeah,
he'd lay in his hospital bed and hold her. And
really?
She'd look up at him and just smile.
Yeah.
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 None of that, do you feel like that wavered your faith at all? Did that instill some doubt in your mind after you lost him or anything like that? Or had you already dealt with death in your family where you were kind of used to that?
I don't know how well I had done handling it ahead of time, but I was enormously consoled because I was losing the person who had not only led me to the Lord as my Savior, but he had explained the whole procedure of eternal life and the assurance we have. And so I never wavered from the fact that I knew where he was going. I felt the same way then that I'm it's funny how I'm getting flashbacks because I felt then like I'm feeling now. We didn't know for sure that was going to take him, but they told us it would, and it did. We don't know if this is going to take me or not, but they tell me it is, and it probably is. And I told our pastor the other day, I don't in any way fear death, but I don't plan on winning a race to get there.
Yeah. Yeah.
I will go when God says it's time.
Yeah.
But I probably won't be one of those guys that says, come on, can you hurry it up a little bit?
Yeah.
And that's the way I felt about Dad. I just wanted him around as long as I could.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's awesome.
But besides him as a role model, I was very active in a youth group in our church in Gibson City that I had joined after we closed our little Mennonite church. It was a Methodist church, Gibson. We had a pastor by the name of Dr. Sidney Guthrie, who tried very, very hard to persuade me into the ministry. And I never bent that far.
Yeah.
But he gave me a lot of confidence in myself and was just a wonderful counselor and leader for me.
Yeah.
And I really looked up to him. And I think it taught me to realize as I started working with young boys later as a youth director and youth pastor, I think it helped me to realize how every young boy, even though I was in my early 20s by that time, there's still a certain amount of boy left in us.
Yeah.
And I realized how close it was, how important it was to have somebody close, like your father or someone able to represent that position after your father's gone.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was the respect that I had there.
Yeah. Yeah, so getting involved in that youth group, was that definitely different from your Mennonite church? Was that a...
Oh, we didn't have enough people to...
Yeah.
And you know, the other problem was, in that Mennonite church, that was part of our problem. One family lived 22 miles that way, the other that lived 14 miles that way.
Yeah.
And there was no getting together. And there was no getting together at our church because we had no heat, we had no lights.
So there wasn't much of a community aspect around that at all.
No.
Yeah.
And we had an outhouse, and that was it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Interesting. Yeah, times have definitely changed on that. That's one of the biggest things too, is getting your kids involved and having a role.
They wouldn't let you meet in a place like that now.
Yeah, exactly.
It'd be against code and all that good stuff, you know.
Yeah.
So.
No doubt.
Yeah. I've looked back and chuckled about the fact that, good grief, those Mennonites were violating a code. You know?
They were making you suffer.
It didn't exist. It didn't exist then. But
exactly.
Yeah. Times have changed.
Yeah. Now you talk about your dad being your best friend a little bit as well, playing that role. Did you have any people your age that were your best friend growing up, or that you would hang out with a lot?
Yeah, my high school was a kind of a different bag of tricks because I was so involved in music that I was rehearsing all the time. Mm-hmm. And so as a result, I only had one guy that I ran around with all the time. And whenever he and I had time to run around, he was either with me or I was with him.
Yeah.
And so it kind of sounds like I only had one friend when I was in high school. That's certainly not the case, but I really only had one friend to spend my extra time with because I was involved in music almost on a daily basis.
Yeah. Did you continue that relationship after high school or anything like that?
That's the strangest thing.
Yeah.
I don't think I've seen Ronnie. And we saw one another every day, but I don't think I've seen him. He came to my mom's funeral, and that may be the only time I've seen him.
Really?
Since I graduated from high school.
Yeah.
We immediately went to the Army. And when he got out, he moved to Bloomington, Illinois, became city manager of Bloomington, Illinois.
Yeah.
And then he was living in that world. I was in Chicago, and we used to call one another once in a while and threaten to meet for a Cubs game because he was a dyed-in-the-wool Cubs game.
Yeah.
Cub fan, excuse me.
Scared buddy a little there.
Yeah, it even startled him. Like I was, but we never ever got together. And it's really funny because now it's how many years later, good grief, 40 some years later, my mom dies, and there comes Ronnie walking into the funeral. And so we got off on the side and got to talking about old times and laughing, and he said, well, you know what? He said, you'd be proud of me. He said, he had a daughter, so he said, I wound up with a son-in-law that's just as crazy for the Cubs as you and I have always been. Mm-hmm. And I started to laugh, and he said, why do you think that's funny? And I said, because I got one too. Yep. I was talking to you about your dad.
Yeah.
Well, you really get a kick out of that. So that's what he said. The four of us got to go to a ball game, but we never did it.
Yeah. Yeah, and obviously times are a little bit different than.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so you wouldn't really stay connected.
Well,
like you do now.
I understood he was really stressed by his job.
I bet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He said it's just one problem after another.
Yeah. Is he still alive?
I don't even know.
Really?
As far as I know, because I've never seen it come up in my. I know both of his brothers have died, but
Yeah.
I've never seen where Ronnie did.
Yeah.
Ronnie Gramley.
That's fun.
Yeah.
You guys were the same age in school then?
He was a year behind me.
You're behind.
Yeah. Which was another thing why I immediately left after I graduated. He had another year of school to go, and so that kind of
Yeah.
drove a wedge in there too.
Yeah. If you guys were the same age, do you think he'd be somebody that you would have gone off to Chicago with? Or do you think...
No, because he was bound determined he was going to go to the Army.
Okay.
And then he had 2 years of that, and that was enough.
Yeah.
And he got out as quick as he could. And obviously, he must have gone to school somewhere and gotten a major in accounting in order to wind up with the position of city manager of a city the size of Bloomington. But yeah. We would send notes to one another through somebody else. Hey, tell Jerry hi. Hey, tell Ron hi.
Yeah.
But just never managed to stay connected.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, so what was, speaking of school, what was school like growing up? Like grade school, anywhere from there up to high school, whatever you wanted to speak on.
Grade school was a kind of a non-plus, really. I used to get beat up on a lot in grade school, so I didn't spend much time out on the street.
Yeah.
We had a bunch of roughies in grade school, and I just I didn't enjoy grade school a whole lot. And again, high school. I loved high school, but I was either playing or practicing somewhere all the time.
Yeah.
I did a lot of solo work. I was in a quartet. I was in a sextet. I was in a boys chorus. I was in a mixed chorus. Then I played trombone. Then I was in a brass quartet, and I was in a brass octet, and and then I put my own orchestra together.
Yeah.
We used to do little gigs on a Friday or Saturday night, like the Lions Club would sponsor a teenage dance somewhere, and we'd go play for it. And
Yeah.
they'd give us $50 or something, And that's just between that and church. And I was really involved in youth work and wound up becoming president of the sub-district which involved 13 churches.
Yeah.
And I just didn't have any more time to do anything.
Exactly. Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Now, for those groups, were you traveling much, or were you like outside of Gibson City, or was a lot of it in just really close nearby towns that you were?
Oh, yeah, pretty much in close. Except when we go to music contests, that would always be in Jacksonville, Illinois, which was 150 miles away.
Yeah. Where Jack is.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. In fact, I described his campus to him before he ever got there.
Really?
Yeah, we used to go over there between events and just walk around and look.
Yeah.
But
now, is that the furthest you guys traveled for your different groups?
I think it probably is. Our quartet traveled different places, but I don't know that I don't think we got any farther away than that.
Yeah.
But
yeah. Nice.
And here again, no one could afford the gas to get very far. So.
Now, did you guys have like a bus to use, or what were you doing for that?
If it was a school event, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But or one of the teachers would drive a station wagon or something like that.
Yeah.
But if we were on our own, we were on our own.
Yeah, exactly.
And they would give us about enough money to pay the gas there and back. So.
Kind of evened out.
Yeah.
More about the experience and doing it and whatnot.
Yeah.
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 Yeah, so thinking back of high school and the stories you've told me about your story of not like officially graduating high school ever.
Yeah.
I always enjoy hearing that one.
What this led into was the fact that I didn't realize this at the time. A kid never stops and thinks about something like that. But I found out later the choral teacher and the band instructor were battling over me all the time, trying to get the office to let me skip a class. I mean, for the semester, not just, and be in the chorus, which was first hour every day, and our band instructor used to battle for me to be in the band, which was the seventh hour every day, the last hour every day. And I didn't think about the fact that I had one less year English than anybody else, or one less year literature than anybody else, and never had any problems speaking. I never had any, and I think I've probably, out of my graduating class, my guess is I've done more public speaking than anybody else in the class. I've spoken before 3 governors, and I don't know of anybody else that's done that in the class. But I graduated on a Sunday afternoon on my birthday, and Saturday afternoon I looked out and the principal pulled up in front of my house, and I thought, what's that about? Because I knew I hadn't done anything. But you run all this stuff through your mind. Have I? No.
Yeah.
But he came up and very polite and said, could I talk with your mom and dad? And I said, sure. I went and got mom and dad, and he said, could I speak with you alone? And my dad said, I think anything you have to say, you can say in front of Jerry, meaning if he's done something, I want him to know I know about it,
Yeah.
And he said, well, we've made a terrible mistake in the office. And because over the years, we've let Miss Sapp and Mr. West, that were the 2 teachers, talk us into letting him have 6 hour every day to rehearse. And when we got tallying up for everything to put the diplomas together, Jerry doesn't have enough literature courses to graduate. Well, I could just see my dad smoldering a little bit. My dad never saw my dad once in my life, but that's about as close as he ever came. And he said, well, I look upon that as your problem and not ours. He said, well, the problem of it is, it would be like forgery if I sign his diploma knowing that he doesn't qualify. So I literally walked across that stage the next day with an empty diploma, and nobody but the principal and my mom and dad and God and I knew about it. And so then I had an opportunity because before I could get into Northwestern, I had to have those courses. So
yeah, they
were very cooperative in helping me make those up, and I basically tested through most of it. But it was a very frustrating feeling that, you're finally out, you're through, whoops, and so that was kind of interesting.
Yeah. But you made it.
I made it.
Exactly.
I made it, yeah.
Alrighty. Let's see. What world event do you think impacted your life the most, or has impacted the world around you the most? Just off the top of your head, nothing.
Yeah,
nothing
well,
too
off
deep
the top
like
of
that.
my head, graduating from high school and walking right into the Korean War was sobering. I was to later find out that my rheumatic fever that I had had during school kept me from passing my physical. I was what's called 4F. And so they didn't take me. But then that got scary too, because they lost my medical records, so I had to go in anyway. But I was only in a couple weeks, and they discovered they discovered my files, and then they booted me out.
Yeah.
But so I didn't have to go to Korea. But to worry that the day I got my notice to go for my physical for the Army, my buddy next door got shot and killed in Korea. And that was an emotional drain. And so the Korean War has certainly had, and it certainly was an attention getter for me.
Definitely.
And then there's just been so many things happen down the line. Probably the most moving thing, and I realize there's a long gap between the Korean War and 2000, whatever it was. But 9/11 was a real eye-opener for everybody.
Yeah.
And so otherwise it's kind of just been the routine things, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And but you wake up every day knowing that I wonder what's going to happen today.
Yeah. Yeah, with all the crazy things that are
more
going
today than ever before.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you feel like you're pretty desensitized to a lot of that? I feel like most people probably are.
Well, I am, except you haven't asked this question, but I'll answer it anyway if I can make one.
You make your own.
If I have any regrets in my life, and I can tell you that I'm fortunate enough that I have very, very few, but I am feeling bad right now, not knowing what kind of a mess we're leaving for my 8 grandchildren, for everybody's grandchildren, but I'm most concerned about mine. I don't know what the future is going to bring for you guys.
Yeah.
There's going to be some tough days ahead.
For sure.
And it doesn't make me happy or proud.
Yeah.
Makes me concerned.
Definitely, yeah.
Yeah. And I don't feel like we have done right by you, frankly.
Mm-hmm.
And that bothers me a lot. I think about that every day.
It's interesting too when a lot of people talk about like it's the current generation's fault, things like that, when really they're the ones who were brought up by other people that are older. Not to put the blame on everybody that has gone through. Obviously, every generation has its own problems and whatnot, but obviously somebody had to raise them or give them that entitlement. Nobody just inherently gets all of that, I guess.
That brings the temptation of a response that I don't feel like putting on tape.
Yeah. Cool.